The snow that fell on Bridgeport that January wasn't gentle. It howled against brick walls and rattled lampposts, yet inside a cozy little coffee shop called Maple and Elm, the world stood still for Elena Reyes. A 25-year-old interior design graduate working 2 part-time jobs to pay off student loans, Elena sat curled in a corner, sketching lighting concepts in a battered sketch pad. Her caramel-toned hands were stained with pencil graphite, her almond eyes deeply focused. She wasn't supposed to be there that day. Her evening shift at the design firm had been canceled due to the storm. Across the room, Cole Harrington had taken refuge after his luxury car skidded on ice and stalled nearby. He wasn't used to cold. His life had been one of privilege, albeit fractured. The first time his eyes met Elena's was over a spilled cup of chai tea that soaked part of her sketchbook. Her frustrated sigh turned into laughter when he apologized awkwardly, using a napkin with a firm hand and a shy smile. He wasn't polished like she expected a man in a Hugo Boss coat to be. He was awkward, surprisingly genuine. That day, something began, tentative, unexpected, electric. Cole wasn't the kind of man Elena had allowed herself to fall for in the past. Her exes were either dreamers with no direction or users who drained her emotionally. But Cole? He was a contradiction, a man who owned a downtown office space, yet admitted to being estranged from his father. He spoke of building his own tech-based real estate platform, combining AI and predictive analytics to revolutionize property value predictions. It was all too impressive for someone his age. But behind the business talk, Elena sensed a deeper void, like he needed success to prove something. She, on the other hand, found beauty in simplicity. She told him how she learned interior design from her mother, who painted homes in vibrant Latin tones that reminded her of their roots. Their conversations flowed from career dreams to childhood traumas. Cole spoke of his stepmother's cruelty, of boarding schools where he felt invisible, and Elena, soft, attentive, emotionally intelligent, listened like no one ever had. By the time the snow stopped falling, it felt like they'd known each other forever. They exchanged numbers, but more than that, they exchanged something unspoken, a promise neither realized they'd made. Days turned to weeks, and their bond grew quietly. They met up for Thai takeout in Elena's apartment, where she insisted on eating on the floor with candles and soft jazz. Cole brought over books he thought she'd love, architecture, psychology, even poetry. For a man so seemingly confident, he allowed her to see his vulnerabilities, his self-doubt, his craving for family, his loneliness. And she showed him her dreams, drawings of spaces she'd design if she had her own firm. She loved modern rustic, textures that spoke of heritage. He watched her hands move as she explained wall textures and mood boards and realized she made spaces come alive. For the first time in years, he laughed freely. Elena thought she had found someone who saw her not as an obligation, but as an equal, someone whose silence didn't feel heavy, but safe. Their first kiss wasn't dramatic. It happened during a grocery run in the rain, but it left her awake for hours that night, wondering if she had finally stumbled into something rare. As winter melted into spring, they fell deeper, not like fireworks, but like roots threading into soil. It was, at the time, everything she had dreamed of. The blossoming of their relationship was slow, intentional, and so deeply nuanced it felt like poetry written across seasons. Elena and Cole's romance unfolded like brushstrokes on a blank canvas, each moment layering texture, meaning, and emotion onto the last. After their fateful winter meeting, their connection grew throughout spring. They spent weekends exploring forgotten antique stores in neighboring towns, bonding over mismatched chandeliers and century-old mosaic tiles. Elena had never felt so intellectually and emotionally stimulated. Cole, despite his sharp business instincts, carried a surprising curiosity about design and color psychology. He would often ask her how shades could influence mood or why exposed brick walls made people feel nostalgic. She once redesigned his small office break room as a surprise, transforming it from a cold, sterile corner to a cozy industrial modern space with warm hues and minimalistic art. The joy on his face when he saw it, the awe in his voice when he said, "You turned this into a place I want to be," became a memory she tucked away like a rare jewel. They weren't just dating, they were building. Their weekends in Vermont became a ritual, an escape from their growing work pressures and the noise of the city. They rented a tiny cabin tucked between whispering pines, without Wi-Fi or distractions. There, Cole would share stories from his childhood in upstate New York, how his real mother died of cancer when he was 7, and how Beverly, his stepmother, never wanted children of her own but tolerated him because of his father's fortune. Alina would talk about growing up in a bilingual household, how her parents worked cleaning homes and fixing furniture but always insisted she dream beyond limitations. Those weekends were sacred. They cooked together, read aloud from journals, and even planted a wildflower garden near the cabin's edge. It was during one of these trips, while they painted the porch railing white and laughed about their crooked strokes, that Alina quietly imagined a life with Cole, a life not of grand luxury, but of shared mornings, warmth, and laughter. When he took her hand and kissed it with eyes full of quiet intensity, she believed this was real, something neither of them could walk away from easily. Then came the moment that sealed the foundation of their love story, a moment that was raw, unexpected, and emotionally charged. It was the night of Alina's very first solo interior design exhibition at the McFarland Art Space. She had curated every detail, from the floral installation suspended from the ceiling to the interactive floor plan of her dream boutique hotel. Her heart pounded with equal parts excitement and dread as she watched critics roam with pens in hand. But then Cole appeared, dressed simply in a navy blue blazer, standing still in front of her centerpiece with a gaze that shimmered with admiration. When she approached him, unsure of his reaction, he smiled and said, "This is exactly how I imagined your mind looks, beautiful chaos." And then, in front of 30 guests and under a dome of golden lights, he dropped to one knee. The room gasped, but Alina froze, overwhelmed. She hadn't seen it coming. His voice trembled as he spoke of how she reminded him that real love didn't hurt, that she had given his life meaning he never knew he was missing. With tears in her eyes and breath caught in her throat, she said yes. The applause was deafening, but in that moment, it was just the two of them, hearts wrapped around each other like ivy. And in the crowd, Lena, Alina's best friend, wiped a tear while whispering, "Finally." What no one knew, however, was that in the far end of the gallery stood a figure watching with folded arms, Justin, Cole's longtime friend, who had always known Cole's heart, and always feared it would one day turn cold again. The moment Alina stepped into the Harrington estate for the first time, something inside her shifted. The house was everything her childhood hadn't been: grand marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of ancestors she couldn't name. But despite the opulence, the air felt cold, sterile, and heavy with unspoken tension. Roger Harrington, Cole's father, was a tall, silver-haired man whose handshake was stiff and eyes hard. He welcomed her politely but without warmth. Beverly, Cole's stepmother, didn't bother with pretense. From the moment Alina said hello, Beverly's expression never softened. She observed Alina like a threat in a designer dress. At dinner, Beverly subtly mocked Alina's upbringing, making backhanded comments like, "It's wonderful that someone from such a modest background values education." Cole noticed, of course, but remained silent. That silence would become a seed, one that would later grow thorns. Back home that night, Alina didn't mention how insulted she felt. She just lay beside Cole, staring at the ceiling, wondering if love could truly bridge such a social divide. In contrast, Alina's family welcomed Cole with open arms. Her father, Gustavo Reyes, worked as a tile craftsman who took immense pride in his hands, rough, calloused, honest hands. He cooked birria tacos that Cole devoured and told jokes that broke through Cole's stiff exterior. Rosa, Alina's mother, was a warm, soft-spoken woman who wore floral aprons and hummed old ballads while gardening. She gifted Cole a hand-sewn journal the second time he visited, saying, "You should write down your blessings. You forget less that way." For a while, Cole seemed touched by the contrast, but Beverly's hold never loosened. She began feeding Roger narratives about how Alina was after the Harrington name, suggesting that marrying her would jeopardize Cole's pending investor deal with the Caldwells, a multi-million-dollar contract that required elite social reputation. The first real fracture came when Rosa was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Alina was devastated, and while her father worked extra shifts to afford a clinical trial, she turned to Cole for support. Instead of stepping up, Cole distanced himself, saying his father was cutting him off temporarily and he couldn't afford to help. In truth, Beverly had convinced him that helping the sick mother of a girl from nowhere would ruin his professional brand. Alina was crushed, not just by the refusal, but by the coldness with which Cole delivered it. He didn't even flinch when she cried that night, curled on their couch, clutching her mother's test results in trembling hands. That was the night Lena came over and found her friend broken. Lena, fierce, protective, and blunt, had always had doubts about Cole's family. She had warned Alina long ago not to get lost in a man's shadow. "It's not just about love, Alina," she said, gently wiping her tears. "It's about the fight he's willing to give for you when things fall apart." But Alina wasn't ready to give up, at least not yet. She believed people changed. She thought maybe Cole was under pressure. So she took a second freelance job and secretly sold 2 of her hand-painted pieces to pay part of her mother's hospital bills. What she didn't know was that Beverly was already orchestrating Cole's exit plan. She had contacted Vanessa Caldwell, the daughter of the investor Cole needed to impress. Vanessa was elegant, influential, and ruthless. And she had one condition before signing anything with Cole's startup: Cole had to be seen with a woman of her caliber. Beverly smiled when she heard it. The plan was already forming. All she needed now was for Alina to break, and Cole to believe she wasn't strong enough to stay. The day Alina lost her mother was a day the world stopped spinning. Rosa Reyes passed quietly in her sleep at 3:41 a.m., clutching the rosary beads Alina had placed in her hands the night before. The hospital room had smelled of antiseptic and fading lilies, and though the sun had just begun to rise, Alina's soul felt like it had sunk into endless night. Gustavo, devastated but stoic, held Alina close while whispering in Spanish that her mother was finally at peace. But there was no peace in Alina's heart. She called Cole, hands shaking, voice breaking, begging him to come be with her, to hold her, to just show up. He said he had meetings. Said he'd try. He never did. Instead, Lena showed up, with breakfast she knew Alina wouldn't eat, a shawl for the cold that clung to her skin, and the kind of silence that allowed grief to breathe. The funeral was held in a modest church filled with family and neighbors. Cole appeared late, dressed perfectly, standing at the back like a stranger. He didn't approach the casket. He barely met her eyes. That night, as mourners filtered out and the house went quiet, Alina sat in her childhood bedroom with her mother's worn recipe book in her lap and the crushing realization that the man she loved was slowly becoming someone she didn't recognize. Cole, on the other hand, was changing, but not by accident. Beverly's influence over him had grown insidiously strong. He had always admired power, having been denied so much of it as a child. Now, with the Harrington name hanging like a sword over his head, he had begun to chase legacy over love. Beverly whispered into his ear that Alina was an emotional liability, a woman whose grief would drown him, whose lack of social status would eventually suffocate his business deals. She reminded him of the Caldwell partnership and how Vanessa could offer not just influence, but access to international expansion, real money. "Cole," she'd say, sipping red wine beside a roaring fire. What Beverly didn't tell him was that she had already introduced Vanessa to investors as his intended. Behind Cole's back, deals were being orchestrated with Vanessa as his future wife, not Alina. At the same time, Cole had undergone a vasectomy, encouraged by Beverly, who said children were a distraction until he cemented his empire. He didn't tell Alina. When she brought up starting a family weeks after Rosa's burial, Cole simply shook his head and said, "Now's not the time." There was no discussion, just dismissal. Alina felt it like a slap, cold, final, unyielding. That moment marked the beginning of a slow unraveling. Alina started to question everything: his absences, his avoidance, the empty bed that grew colder with each passing week. Her gut told her something had changed, something deeper than grief or distance. One evening, while doing laundry, she found a receipt in Cole's jacket for a dinner at Le Jardin, a luxury rooftop restaurant they'd never visited together. The reservation had been for 2. Her heart clenched, but she didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she buried herself in work, throwing her energy into small interior gigs she could manage between waves of sadness. Lena noticed the hollow behind her friend's eyes. "You're disappearing, Ollie," she said one night. "And I don't think he even sees it." Alina didn't reply. She couldn't. Meanwhile, Cole became increasingly irritable. He criticized her wardrobe, her tone, even the way she decorated their apartment: too much color. Investors like neutral. Clean. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who once adored her passion now saw it as clutter. That week, Lena cornered Cole in the parking garage of their building. "I don't know what you're doing," she warned, "but if you break her, I swear, I'll make sure you regret it." Cole smirked, brushing past her without a word. And in that quiet exit, 1,000 alarms rang louder than any confession ever could. Alina had always trusted her instincts. She didn't need full proof to feel betrayal bloom like rot in the walls of their once loving home. Cole had become an echo of the man she fell in love with, distant, dismissive, mechanical. But it was the lipstick stain, a bold coral hue on the sleeve of a white Oxford shirt, that tore through her final layer of denial. He'd come home late the night before, claiming to have attended an exclusive investor roundtable at the Waldorf. He smelled of champagne, woodsy cologne, and something sweet and unfamiliar, something that didn't belong in her world. She held the shirt the next morning like it was evidence in a crime scene. Her stomach twisted, her fingers trembled, and her breath stilled. She didn't confront him, not yet. She wanted to know everything before she did. That's when she called Justin. Cole's childhood friend had grown increasingly uneasy watching his best friend morph into something cold. When Alina called him in a shaking voice and asked, "Do you know who she is?" there was a pause, long and weighted, before Justin replied, "Vanessa Caldwell." And just like that, the name turned into a weapon. Vanessa Caldwell wasn't just another woman, she was a storm in heels. A 32-year-old heiress to a multimillion-dollar commercial real estate firm and a woman who had been raised to conquer, not compromise. Alina had seen her once in a magazine, standing next to her father during a groundbreaking ceremony in Tokyo, wrapped in emerald silk with a look that said, "I always win." She was beauty, power, and calculation fused into flesh. Beverly had introduced her to Cole at a charity auction 2 months earlier and made sure Alina never received the invitation. It wasn't just a business partnership being formed, it was a replacement in the making. Vanessa wasn't subtle either. She began appearing on Cole's social media, group photos at art galas, investor brunches, and rooftop fundraisers, always positioned beside him, always with her hand near his shoulder or chest. Alina noticed the comments under the posts, "Power couple energy," and "Is this your new queen, Cole?" She said nothing, but the world was already whispering behind her back. Lena tried to convince her to call Vanessa out publicly. Expose her. You have every right. But Alina shook her head. "If I go down to her level, I lose everything that makes me different," she replied softly. Still, the silence aided her. Then came the night that shattered any lingering illusions. Cole had promised to be home early to attend Alina's networking dinner, an event she'd been preparing for weeks, hosted by a renowned interior firm looking for fresh talent. She wore her mother's earrings, a velvet green dress, and hope. But Cole never showed. His phone rang out, then went off. She smiled through introductions, made excuses, sipped sparkling water as the minutes dragged. After the event, numb but restless, she took a cab to their apartment only to find it dark and empty. Out of curiosity, or desperation, she pulled up an industry blogger's Instagram page. The blogger was live at a private real estate after-party in Tribeca, and there, in the frame, was Cole, his arm wrapped around Vanessa's waist, laughing beneath gold chandeliers. Alina froze, phone trembling in her hands, eyes burning. He had chosen not just another woman, but another life. One that she no longer fit into. That night, she didn't cry. Instead, she placed her heels neatly by the door, sat on their sofa, and began flipping through her old sketchbook, the one she'd shelved months ago. Page by page, idea by idea, she remembered the woman she was before Cole. And for the first time in a long time, her reflection in the window didn't look broken. It looked quiet. And it looked ready. Alina Reyes had spent her life believing that truth always revealed itself eventually. But in the days that followed the discovery of Cole's public rendezvous with Vanessa, she realized that lies didn't just hide in shadows, they danced boldly under chandeliers. The betrayal felt surreal. Cole no longer tried to cover his tracks. He'd come home late, sometimes not at all, and when he did, he wore a confidence so cold it chilled the walls. There were no apologies, no explanations, just the quiet implication that she should know better than to ask. Alina pretended for a while, cooked meals he didn't eat, left notes he didn't answer, held onto the idea that maybe this was just a phase. But the silence between them had turned into a canyon. Justin, clearly uncomfortable watching Cole spiral, reached out to Alina one afternoon. He didn't say much, just sent her a name and number, Sylvia Carter, private investigator. Alina stared at the message for hours before calling. If there was still a sliver of her heart that doubted what she saw, she needed it cut out with the blade of truth. Sylvia was a retired NYPD detective turned discreet investigator. Sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, she met Alina in a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. Alina handed her a small envelope of suspicious receipts, timestamps, and Cole's changing schedules. Sylvia didn't promise comfort, just answers. Within 4 days, Alina had them. High-definition photographs, Cole kissing Vanessa in a suite at the Langham Hotel, entering and exiting Vanessa's penthouse on Fifth Avenue on back-to-back nights, and most humiliating of all, Cole introducing Vanessa to investors at a private rooftop engagement as his partner in both vision and life. Alina's hands trembled as she sifted through the envelope of images, each one stabbing deeper than the last. The man she once shared a bed with was now parading another woman with the same hand that once slid a ring onto hers. She didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, This is what I needed. Lena, upon seeing the photos, flew into rage. He's not just cheating, he's replacing you like furniture. Alina didn't flinch. Her tears had dried into resolve. That night, she packed up her essentials, left her wedding ring on the marble kitchen counter, and walked out. No drama, no fight, no goodbye. 3 days later was their 5th wedding anniversary, and Cole had arranged a lavish dinner at Le Monde, a Michelin-star rooftop restaurant in Manhattan. But it wasn't for Alina. It was for Vanessa. Photographers captured them as they arrived, him in a custom black tuxedo, her in a champagne gown, laughing like royalty. Inside, the air was scented with vanilla orchids and champagne. Vanessa leaned in and asked, Does she know you're filing next week? Cole chuckled, swirling his glass. She'll come running. Her next move is to beg. Watch. What he didn't know was that across town, Alina had walked barefoot into her childhood apartment in Queens, holding nothing but her sketchbook and one suitcase. Her father hugged her silently while Lena changed the sheets on her old bed. That night, she lit a single candle by her mother's picture and whispered, I'm sorry I stayed silent for so long. Then, she opened a new journal and wrote the date in bold. She wasn't sure what her next steps were, but one thing was clear, she wouldn't be coming back. Not the way he expected. Cole believed she was broken. But what he had done, what he thought would destroy her, had just started to rebuild her. And this time, she was going to rise from scratch. The first night back in her childhood bedroom felt like a haunting. The walls were still painted pale yellow, her high school trophies still lined the shelf, and a faded poster of Frida Kahlo stared at her from across the room like a silent witness. Alina lay curled on the bed, gripping her mother's old scarf and suffocating in the echo of her own heartbreak. She hadn't eaten in 24 hours, and her body trembled with exhaustion and unspoken grief. At exactly 2:12 a.m., she broke. The sobs came like waves, violent and without rhythm, racking her chest as she gasped for breath between choked cries. Lena, sleeping in the living room, heard her and rushed in, wrapping her arms tightly around her friend. Let it out, baby girl, she whispered, rocking her like a child. You've been holding in an earthquake. For nearly an hour, Alina let herself crumble. All the humiliation, the betrayal, the mourning, for her mother, for her marriage, for the future she thought she'd have, spilled out like water from a cracked dam. It was the kind of breakdown that empties a person to their bones. But in its aftermath, there was silence. Not the hollow kind, but the clearing kind. The kind that made room for something else to begin. In the days that followed, Alina did not try to piece things back together. Instead, she let the world stay broken. She didn't check social media, didn't respond to Cole's empty texts asking where she went, didn't react when a box of her belongings showed up at Lena's doorstep with a handwritten note that read, "Hope you find what you're looking for." She burned it. Instead, she sat by the kitchen window each morning with coffee and her sketchbook, letting sunlight fall across blank pages. One morning, she found an old concept drawing she had made 3 years ago, a boutique hotel designed with organic shapes, warm terracotta tones, and subtle nods to Latin American architecture. She remembered how alive she felt while creating it, before her life became about fitting into someone else's empire. That same morning, she applied for 3 freelance jobs anonymously, using her maiden name. She didn't expect callbacks. But the act alone was a whisper of rebellion, proof that some fire still lived within her. Lena watched her with quiet pride. "You're not just surviving," she said one night. "You're coming back to life." Alina didn't reply. She didn't have to. The light in her eyes said it all. What truly marked the beginning of Alina's awakening was the accidental visit to a local community center downtown. She had gone there to pick up art supplies for her father, who had taken up painting to cope with grief. In the corner of the center's art room, a group of teenagers were painting murals as part of a city grant program. One of them, Noelle, a 15-year-old with charcoal-stained hands, complimented Alina's sketchbook when it fell from her bag. Intrigued by the rawness of their work, she stayed for hours, offering feedback, asking questions, and even sketching alongside them. By the end of the day, the program director, a spirited woman named Donna Marks, asked if she'd consider volunteering. It was the first time in months that Alina said yes to something without thinking of Cole. That weekend, she painted for 12 hours straight, losing herself in color and texture. When she returned home, she flipped open a fresh page and began to redesign her original hotel concept from scratch, this time, for herself. The lines were sharper, the vision bolder. This wasn't just a design anymore. It was a declaration. She was no longer drawing for approval or applause. She was building a future where her name would be known, not as someone's wife, but as someone who rebuilt herself from dust and dared to dream louder than her scars. The offer came unexpectedly, tucked inside an email buried among rejection letters and expired newsletters. Subject: Design Trial Request, Royce Atelier Group. Alina blinked at it, half convinced it was spam. Royce Atelier was a modest but rising interior design agency based in Brooklyn, known for its edgy boutique projects and for rarely hiring outsiders without Ivy League portfolios. She had applied under a Reyes with a digital portfolio of reworked sketches, removing all traces of her past affiliations. She hadn't expected anything. But the message was real. Damian Royce, the agency's creative director, asked her to stop by for a test project, a redesign of a failing hotel lobby near the East River. The catch? She had 3 days, no formal contract, and no pay unless the client loved it. Lena, reading over her shoulder, stared at her. "You're taking this, right?" Alina hesitated, nerves gnawing her ribs. But that same quiet fire from the mural workshop flickered back. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I am." She pulled an all-nighter revisiting her hotel concept, layering in urban textures, recycled woodwork, and color psychology. It wasn't just about saving a space, it was about telling a story. Her story. On the morning of the site visit, Alina dressed in muted earth tones, practical, simple, purposeful. The hotel lobby was worse than she'd expected, dated brass fixtures, beige wallpaper curling at the seams, fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying wasps. But Alina saw more than decay, she saw potential. She paced the space for hours, sketchbook in hand, imagining warm pendant lighting, abstract local art, terracotta tile mosaics that reflected the cultural soul of Brooklyn's heartbeat. Damian arrived just before sunset. He was tall, olive-skinned, with graying temples and an unreadable face. He said nothing for several minutes as she explained her redesign concept, flipping through sketches and digital layouts she'd rendered on her laptop. Finally, he looked up, expression unreadable. "You've got something I haven't seen in a while," he said. "Heart. Come back tomorrow. Let's see what else you've got." Alina left the hotel with wind in her lungs and tremble in her step. That night, she didn't cry for the past. She planned for the next morning, built mood boards, and stayed up till dawn with coffee, music, and purpose. What followed was a montage of growth that didn't feel cinematic, but felt real. Every day, Alina returned to that hotel site, putting in hours most interns wouldn't survive. She sourced local artwork, met with eco-suppliers, designed reusable materials, and networked with architects who initially didn't take her seriously until they saw her renderings. Word spread. Damian observed from a distance but gave no feedback, only nods that meant keep going. Alina worked quietly, rebuilding not just the space, but herself. She kept her past a secret. No one at Royce Atelier knew she was once Alina Harrington. No one knew she was legally still married to a man who was now gracing the covers of real estate magazines with Vanessa Caldwell by his side. And she preferred it that way. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted to earn everything from the ground up. At night, back at her father's apartment, she'd sketch in silence, sometimes pausing to glance at her mother's old journal that she now kept on her desk. "Make beauty from the broken," Rosa had once written. And that was exactly what Alina was doing. Brick by brick. Brushstroke by brushstroke. Not for revenge. Not for recognition. But because something inside her had woken up, and it wasn't going back to sleep. It had been nearly 2 months since Alina vanished from Cole Harrington's penthouse life like smoke through a crack in the wall, and yet he barely noticed. Or so he pretended. To the public, Cole and Vanessa Caldwell had become the rising monarchs of the real estate tech world, a gilded couple photographed at every luxury opening, gala, and charity brunch. Their image was tightly curated, built on perfectly timed social posts, shared interviews, and a stunning joint feature in Forbes Lifestyle. But beneath the glitter was a rotting foundation. Cole was spending money faster than he was earning it, buying prestige at the cost of stability. The investors Vanessa's father brought in had conditions, and one of them was Cole distancing himself from any drama from the past. That meant erasing Alina like she never existed. Vanessa, ever strategic, made sure no trace of her remained. She had Alina's name scrubbed from old business pitches, requested her social accounts be flagged as impersonations, and even suggested Cole clarify in interviews that he had never been legally married. But Alina hadn't disappeared, she was simply quiet. And in the silence, she was building. It all came to a head at the Donovan Gala, a glittering event hosted by New York's most elite developers and designers. Cole, dressed in black velvet with Vanessa on his arm, was smiling for cameras when he spotted someone unexpected, Justin. His former best friend, who had been conspicuously absent for weeks. Justin was leaning against the bar, glass in hand, gaze cool. Cole approached with the fake grin he'd mastered. "Didn't think you'd show," he said. Justin's response was curt, "Didn't think you'd still be lying." Before Cole could respond, Justin leaned in. "You really thought you could fake an NDA and accuse Alina of stealing from your company just to save face?" Cole stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Justin did. He had seen the documents, fabricated contracts Vanessa had drawn up to suggest Alina misused company funds. It was Beverly's idea, another web in the trap. They hadn't filed the claim publicly, but word had been leaked to subtly destroy Alina's name within the design community. What they didn't count on was that Alina had quietly gathered proof. With Lena's help and a tech-savvy intern at Royce Atelier, they had traced every falsified email, every misrepresented document. And now, the net was tightening. Days later, Alina received a call from Damien. "I'm about to forward you something. You'll want to see it." In her inbox was a formal retraction from one of Cole's previous investors, stating that Alina Reyes had been falsely represented in a slanderous memo. Enclosed were 2 internal emails Vanessa had mistakenly CC'd to the wrong contact, emails directly linking her to the attempt to blackball Alina from ever working in the city again. Alina didn't respond with rage. She responded with power. Through her attorney, she issued a cease and desist and quietly filed a civil defamation claim, without naming names in public. The noise grew. Whispers surfaced in designer lounges and boardrooms. People began to wonder, who was the woman Cole tried so hard to erase? Damien, finally seeing the storm circling Alina's name, called her in and asked, "Do you want to step into the light now?" Alina paused. "Not yet," she replied. "Let them think I'm buried." That same week, the redesigned hotel lobby officially reopened, organic, warm, stunning. The media buzzed about the anonymous designer behind the project. And Vanessa? She threw a crystal wine glass at her mirror when she saw the photos online. Because despite all the sabotage, despite all the lies, they had failed to break Alina. And they were only just beginning to realize it. Alina stood at the edge of the East River one misty morning, staring into the water like it held the answer to a question she had never asked aloud. The city buzzed behind her, alive with ambition, arrogance, and memory. In her hand, she clutched a brown envelope, not one containing proof of betrayal or legal documents, but a finalized contract. Royce Atelier had offered her a full-time position, not as a junior designer, but as lead creative on a series of boutique restorations across the state. It was everything she had once begged Cole to believe in. And yet, she couldn't feel triumph just yet. Not when he still had a chain tethered to her ankle in the form of legal silence. She was still his wife. Her name was still tied to his in official records. That knowledge had become a weight, dragging behind her like iron. The moment she signed the Royce contract, she knew something else had to be signed too: divorce papers. Not because she wanted revenge or closure, but because she was done waiting for him to free her. She would free herself. That same day, she walked into the downtown family law office, head held high, and requested a petition to dissolve her marriage to Cole Harrington. The receptionist blinked when she gave the name. "You're his wife?" the woman asked, eyebrows raised. Alina simply nodded. Not for much longer. The filing process was cold, clinical, and more emotionally jarring than she had anticipated. But she didn't flinch. She filled every blank, signed every page, and slid the papers back across the counter like a final performance. Cole received the notice 3 days later in a thick white envelope while attending a luxury architecture event with Vanessa. He laughed, actually laughed, when he read it. "She finally found some courage," he said, tossing the envelope aside. Vanessa smirked, swirling her wine. "Her next move is to run come begging. She can't survive without your name." Cole nodded. "She'll break soon. You'll see." Neither of them knew that Alina wasn't breaking. She was becoming bulletproof. And while they toasted to her downfall, she was already writing the next chapter of her life, with pen, not pencil. Back at Royce Atelier, the news of her divorce filing didn't spread because she didn't tell anyone. She didn't need applause for doing what should have been done long ago. Instead, she poured herself into her work. Her next assignment was a high-end redesign of a rundown Victorian manor in Hudson Valley, a challenge that tested both her creativity and her emotional strength. While walking through the crumbling corridors of the manor, something clicked. "This house," she told Damien, "it's not broken. It's just been neglected. Forgotten. Like it's been waiting for someone to bring it back to life." Damien smiled, his respect for her deepening with every insight. "Just like you," he replied. That night, alone in her small apartment, Alina lit a single candle beside her mother's photo, pulled out her wedding ring from the drawer, and stared at it for a long moment. Then she dropped it into a porcelain bowl and struck a match. The flame danced, reflected in her eyes, as she whispered, "Goodbye." The smoke curled upward like a phoenix rising. The final straw hadn't broken her. It had carved her into something stronger. She wasn't waiting for anyone to save her. She was saving herself, quietly, fiercely, permanently. The night before the court hearing was drenched in silence. Alina sat alone in her apartment, the Royce design files untouched on her desk, the city lights flickering through her window like fading memories. The divorce papers had already been received and acknowledged by Cole's legal team. The court had set a date. Tomorrow. She had thought she'd feel nervous or shaken, but instead, she felt a strange stillness, as though her soul had settled into itself. Across the room was the navy blue dress she had chosen weeks ago, simple and quiet, nothing flashy. She didn't need to arrive in war paint. She didn't want to prove anything anymore. That night, she stood before the full-length mirror, brushing her fingers along the outline of her collarbone, the space where once a diamond pendant from Cole had hung. She remembered the anniversary when he gave it to her, how he whispered that she made him feel seen. The irony wasn't lost on her. He had gifted her visibility only to later erase her entirely. Alina stared at her reflection, at the woman who had survived more than heartbreak. She had survived dismissal, humiliation, loss, betrayal, and still, she stood. At Lena's apartment that evening, the mood was heavier. Lena paced the floor like a restless lioness, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she held a glass of wine and listed all the things she thought Alina should demand in court: spousal support, equity shares, a public apology. "You built that man," she hissed. "You made him palatable to investors. You were his campaign without a title. You deserve something back." But Alina only smiled gently. "I don't want his money. I don't want his empire. I want my name back." Lena threw up her hands, frustrated. "Alina, you're being too soft. You walk into that courtroom tomorrow and ask for what's yours." But Alina shook her head. "What's mine isn't there anymore, Lena. What's mine is ahead of me." She spent the rest of the evening reading a letter she had written to her mother and never sent. It was full of gratitude, sorrow, and hope. Then, with a deep breath, she folded it and tucked it into her sketchbook. Her mother had taught her how to turn empty spaces into something beautiful. Tomorrow, she would walk into that courtroom not as a victim, not as a wife, not even as a survivor, but as a woman finally reclaiming her silence. Elsewhere, behind closed doors in the penthouse suite Cole now shared with Vanessa, a very different conversation was happening. Cole sat shirtless on the edge of the bed, reviewing a last-minute email from his attorney. The divorce hearing was scheduled at 10 a.m. sharp. Vanessa, lounging in silk and sipping Prosecco, watched him with a smirk. "So, what's the plan?" she asked. "Do we drag it out? Make her sweat? Offer her something small so she thinks she won?" Cole leaned back with a confident chuckle. "She'll probably cry, maybe throw in a last-minute plea. Her next move is to run come begging. I give it 10 minutes before she folds." Vanessa laughed, clinking her glass against his. Poor thing. She really thought she belonged in this world. Cole smiled as if the future was already secured. He had no idea that the woman he once thought fragile was walking into that courtroom not to fight, but to finish. And that his laughter, smug and careless, would be the last sound of a man standing in the storm he didn't see coming. The courthouse was quieter than Alina expected. The echo of shoes against polished floors, the cold fluorescent lights flickering slightly overhead, and the faint scent of ink and antiseptic filled the space. She walked in alone, holding nothing but a small leather-bound folder and her ID. No entourage. No press. No performance. Just presence. She wore the navy blue dress she had ironed the night before and pulled her hair into a soft chignon that revealed her neck like a statement of grace. As she entered courtroom 3B, the buzz stopped for a moment. Cole was already there, sitting beside Vanessa, both dressed for a photo shoot rather than a legal dissolution. Vanessa wore crimson. Cole wore smugness. He leaned over and whispered something into Vanessa's ear, prompting a laugh. "She came," he said, lips curling into amusement. "Now let's see how long she lasts." Their attorney stood beside them, already flipping through paperwork as though the outcome were inevitable. But Alina didn't acknowledge them. She walked to her side of the room with steady feet and a posture that screamed unbothered. A few heads turned, not because of extravagance, but because of silence. Because sometimes power doesn't enter with noise. Sometimes, it walks in without a word and takes its place. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a tone like tempered steel, called the hearing to order. "This is a mutual filing. Property separation is not being contested. No dependents. No financial claim. Do both parties agree to the terms?" Cole raised his hand confidently. "Yes, Your Honor." Vanessa leaned back with satisfaction, sure the spectacle would unfold. Everyone expected Alina to counter, to demand assets, make a scene, maybe even beg for an apology. But Alina only rose, her voice calm. "Yes, I agree." She handed her signed documents to the clerk without a flicker of emotion. She did not look at Cole. She did not acknowledge Vanessa. She simply placed the final signature of her marriage before the court, turned around, and walked out. No tears. No speeches. Just the soft sound of her heels tapping against courtroom tile as she disappeared through the doors. Behind her, Cole blinked. "That's it?" he asked the lawyer, genuinely confused. Vanessa sneered, "She's trying to act tough. Just wait. She'll come back once reality hits. Her next move is to run come begging." Cole leaned back and laughed, almost triumphantly. "Without my name, she's nothing." But outside those courtroom walls, reality was rewriting itself. Alina didn't leave in a taxi. She didn't walk out into chaos. She exited into light. The sun had broken through thick morning clouds, casting a gold beam across the courthouse steps as she descended. Lena was waiting by the car, engine running, sunglasses on, a single coffee in her hand. "Did you say anything?" she asked. Alina shook her head, buckled in, and replied, "Didn't need to." As they pulled away, Alina turned back just once, not to glance at Cole, but to leave behind every weight she had carried into that courtroom. That version of her, the wife who begged for love, who made herself small, who cried in silence, had signed her own release. She hadn't taken a dime. She hadn't uttered a single accusation. Because she knew something Cole and Vanessa didn't: the greatest revenge wasn't in what you took, but in what you became. And while Cole was still laughing in a courtroom he thought he owned, the woman he believed would break was already miles away, driving toward a future he would never be invited into. In the weeks following the divorce hearing, Cole Harrington expected the silence to end. He waited for a call. A letter. A knock. Something, anything, that would confirm his belief that Alina wasn't strong enough to survive without him. But no message came. Not even a whisper. His curiosity turned to irritation. Then paranoia. Vanessa dismissed his concerns. "She's trying to prove a point," she said with a confident smirk. "Ignore her. She'll crawl back once reality hits." But something was shifting in the background, something neither of them saw coming. The new hotel Cole had purchased in Lower Manhattan, one he had intended to launch as a luxury flagship property, was abruptly dropped by two major design firms. No explanation. No callbacks. Just silence. One of the firms had even accepted a contract, only to pull out after receiving conflict notifications. When Cole tried to track the source, he kept hitting digital dead ends. Meanwhile, Vanessa began noticing subtle changes in their circle, people hesitating to return calls, whispers exchanged behind champagne glasses. Something unseen was unraveling their perfect narrative, thread by thread. And still, Alina said nothing. She was no longer fighting in the open. She didn't need to. Across the city, hidden behind the polished walls of a rebranded firm under the name A. Reyes Interiors, Alina's work was flourishing in silence. Damian Royce had not only offered her full creative control but also made her a silent partner in a new venture, an elite, sustainability-focused design firm that had been quietly gaining traction among Manhattan's wealthiest clients. The redesigned East River Hotel she'd worked on anonymously had just won the prestigious Marlowe Design Excellence Award, an achievement that sent shockwaves through the industry. But her name wasn't on the press release. The world credited A. Reyes, and the mystery only fueled interest. Interior design bloggers speculated the name belonged to a European prodigy or a reclusive heiress. Alina never corrected them. Fame wasn't the goal, freedom was. With her earnings, she moved into a loft in Soho and converted the upstairs storage into a design studio. Her phone rang constantly with new opportunities, but she answered selectively. She no longer chased validation. She created beauty because it had always lived inside her, and now, finally, it was being seen on her terms. Her past was not an anchor anymore. It was her foundation. One afternoon, as she walked through the revitalized Hudson Manor project she had completed under the radar, she received a letter in the mail. A formal invitation to the Paris Global Design Expo, where A. Reyes Interiors had been shortlisted for Emerging International Visionary. The irony made her smile. Not because Paris had once been the honeymoon Cole promised but never delivered. Not because he had always claimed her work was too emotional to scale. But because now, on her own merit, and a name they didn't even recognize, she had reached a global stage she could never stand on. That same week, she passed by a boutique newsstand and noticed a tabloid headline, "Harrington Holdings loses major backers amid rumors of financial instability." She didn't stop. Didn't read further. Didn't gloat. She simply tightened her scarf and kept walking. Somewhere, Cole was unraveling. Somewhere, Vanessa was calculating. But here in the heart of a city that once watched her break, Alina was blooming. And not a single soul could take credit for the woman she had become. Alina stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her Soho loft, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck, not for vanity, but for identity. The woman staring back was almost unrecognizable from the girl who once cried in a penthouse kitchen over lipstick stains and unanswered phone calls. Her face held the calm of someone who had weathered a storm and didn't just survive, but emerged luminous. The loft was now more than a home, it was a sanctuary, a workspace, and the headquarters of A. Reyes Interiors. Its walls were lined with sketches, textile samples, award plaques, and framed photos from the Hudson Manor and East River projects, each symbolizing a battle won. She had grown careful with her circle. Lena remained her closest confidant and voice of truth, while Damien became not only a mentor but a quiet protector in the background. They often shared coffee and philosophy on rooftops, discussing beauty, grief, and resilience as though they were mediums of the same brushstroke. And then there was the city itself. Alina had come to love the rhythm of its solitude. She no longer flinched when someone mentioned Cole's name or when news of Vanessa's latest acquisition flickered across the screen. She had transcended their reach, not with noise, but with evolution. The butterfly moment came unexpectedly. A small non-profit organization from Harlem reached out requesting a pro bono redesign of a youth center that had been vandalized and left unusable. The email wasn't sent to a Reyes Interiors, it was sent to Alina Reyes, directly. One of the teen artists she had once mentored at the community center had spoken her name with reverence. She believed in my sketches when no one else did. Alina read the request twice, heart swelling. She cleared a weekend, visited the space, and instantly saw what it could become, a colorful haven of hope. She gathered Lena, Damien, and even a few interns from her studio and, over a month, transformed the center with warmth, murals, layered lighting, and tactile creativity. When the project was unveiled, the ribbon was cut by the kids themselves. One of them hugged her and whispered, "You made us feel seen." That moment gave her more joy than any press coverage ever had. It reminded her why she chose design in the first place, not for recognition, but for transformation. She had once been invisible, forgotten in a marriage that dimmed her light. Now, she was building spaces that made others feel alive. And in doing so, she had rebuilt herself. Later that week, Alina quietly purchased a penthouse apartment in Tribeca, ironically, just blocks away from the one she had once shared with Cole. The difference was profound. This time, it was hers entirely, paid in full, deed signed in her name. No ghosts. No shadows. Just her and a future she had drawn into existence. She kept the space minimal, soft lighting, neutral palettes with vibrant accents, and plants she watered religiously, as if tending to her past. In a private gesture of closure, she opened an investment account and anonymously funded Justin's tech startup, the same idea Cole had once ridiculed and blocked when he feared competition. Justin had stood by her when no one else did. She called the account Butterfly01. On her rooftop, under a starlit sky, Lena joined her with 2 glasses of red wine. "You know, I used to pray for karma," Lena said with a grin. "But watching you now? This is better." Alina smiled. Karma is noisy. Growth is silent. And as the city pulsed around them, neither of them saw Cole pacing alone in his darkened office, staring at a leaked design brief on his desk. At the top, in delicate serif font, were the words, "Designed by A. Reyes." For the first time in his career, he realized he wasn't competing with a woman he betrayed, he was being outpaced by one he never truly saw. Cole Harrington stood at the edge of the conference room table, palms braced against polished glass, staring at the row of empty chairs. Another investor had walked out, no explanation, no follow-up, just a vague apology and a sudden flight back to Zurich. It was the 3rd this month. His assistant stammered excuses about scheduling conflicts and pending audits, but Cole could feel it, the air around his empire was no longer thick with respect. It was tainted with doubt. Something invisible, corrosive, and calculated was slowly dismantling the legacy he had so carefully constructed. At first, he blamed the economy, then media bias, then competition. But the truth stared back at him in the financial reports, his empire was hemorrhaging from inside. Vanessa, once sharp and radiant beside him, had grown distant and sharper. Her smiles turned curt. Her questions turned cold. When she confronted him about inconsistencies in his financial disclosures, money funneled into unnecessary acquisitions, silent withdrawals, he shrugged. "I built this. I know what I'm doing." But she was no fool. Days later, Vanessa's father pulled his capital from the Caldwell-Harrington development deal, citing loss of confidence. And then Vanessa was gone, her closet empty, her ring left on a marble counter, her goodbye a line of red lipstick across the bathroom mirror. "You lost more than me. You lost yourself." The fall wasn't immediate. It was incremental. Cole watched as smaller firms he once mocked began rising in industry rankings, taking clients who no longer returned his calls. News articles speculated about his sudden absence from panels and award circuits. Rumors whispered that the mysterious firm A. Reyes Interiors had gained favor with European investors once aligned with Harrington Group. What hurt most wasn't that he was losing, it was that he didn't even know who was beating him. One night, desperate, Cole called Justin. It went straight to voicemail. He sat alone in his penthouse, the same one Alina once wept in while he poured wine for another woman, and suddenly, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was screaming. He scrolled through Vanessa's last Instagram story, a casual selfie with a rival developer at a bar. His heart sank, not from jealousy, but from understanding. He had become disposable, just like he once made Alina feel. He stood up, stormed into his home office, and pulled out old files from their shared projects, searching for her handwriting, her ideas, her name. It hit him like a train. She was the soul behind it all. And he had tossed her out like clutter. Across town, Alina attended a quiet charity banquet hosted by a foundation that rebuilt homes for displaced single mothers. She wore an off-shoulder charcoal gown, her hair tucked into a sleek bun, and a soft smile that never reached vanity. Damien introduced her to a circle of European architects who had flown in just to meet the elusive Reyes. For the first time, she allowed her name to be spoken aloud. "Alina Reyes," she said with clarity, extending her hand. One of the guests, a silver-haired Frenchman with a distinct accent, replied, "Ah, so you are the woman who designs like a poet and moves like a mystery." She chuckled. "Only when necessary." That night, she danced. Not for show. Not for healing. But for joy. And as she stepped out into the night air afterward, she looked up at the city skyline, not to remember what she lost, but to marvel at what she reclaimed. Karma hadn't come with thunder or vengeance. It had arrived quietly, through growth, through grace, through success that couldn't be faked or stolen. Cole's laughter in the courtroom had long faded. Now it was her laughter that echoed, in halls, in hearts, and in every deal she signed. Karma, it seemed, had a favorite melody. And it sounded a lot like her name. The grand ballroom of the Astoria Renaissance Hotel shimmered with gold-trimmed chandeliers and the soft murmur of anticipation. It was the annual International Design Consortium Gala, a night where visionaries across the globe were recognized not for wealth or fame, but for transformation, designs that shifted cultures, sparked conversation, and challenged the expected. Alina hadn't planned to attend. It was Damien who insisted. "You're not hiding anymore," he told her firmly. "Your work deserves the room." She reluctantly agreed, arriving in a gown of sleek black satin that clung with elegance but spoke volumes in silence. The event was abuzz with murmurs about Reyes. Rumors had swirled for months, and tonight, whispers hinted the mystery designer might finally be present. When the presenter stepped up to the podium and said, "This year's Global Design Visionary Award goes to a woman whose work redefined resilience and sophistication, please welcome Alina Reyes of A. Reyes Interiors," the room fell into collective gasp. Phones lifted. Heads turned. Cameras flashed. And Alina rose, unhurried, graceful, glowing. She walked the aisle she once watched others dominate, not with vengeance, but with reverence for every step it took to get there. Cole Harrington stood near the rear of the ballroom, flanked by two former colleagues, barely recognized by anyone anymore. He hadn't expected to be invited. He came as someone's plus one, hoping to network, maybe pick up remnants of his crumbling image. The moment he heard her name, he froze. He hadn't heard her voice in over a year, but now it rang out across the speakers, confident, measured, filled with purpose. "Design saved me when words failed," she said at the podium. "It gave me back my voice when it was dismissed, erased, and silenced. I create for those who've ever been told they're too emotional, too soft, too invisible. We are none of those things. We are architects of rebirth." The audience erupted in applause. Cole couldn't move. Flashbacks hit him like bricks, her sketches he once tossed aside, her dreams he belittled, the night she walked out and never looked back. But now, every headline, every whisper in the room, every eye that followed her belonged to her. Not to them. Not to what they were. But to the woman he never truly saw until she no longer stood beside him. After the ceremony, Alina remained composed, navigating conversations with dignitaries and design legends, each handshake an acknowledgement of her earned place. But before she left, something unexpected happened. A reporter approached with a hesitant smile. "Miss Reyes, how did you find your strength after such a public disappearance?" Alina paused, then replied with a smile that held both pain and triumph. "By remembering I was never lost. Just buried under someone else's version of me." With that, she walked out into the cool night, head held high, award in hand, and a legacy that could no longer be denied. Meanwhile, Cole slipped away through a side door, suffocated by the realization that the woman he tried to erase had become the story the world wanted to remember. As he sat in the back seat of a cab, staring out at the city skyline that no longer bowed to his name, he muttered aloud, "She became everything." And for the first time, he tasted the bitterness of regret, not because he lost her, but because she had found herself, and there was no place for him in the world she now ruled. The email came on a Tuesday morning, unmarked, polite, and utterly unexpected. Subject line, "Request to meet, Cole." Alina stared at it for a long time, her coffee growing cold beside her. She hadn't heard his name spoken directly to her in over a year. Not from him. Not without bitterness or accusation. Now, here it was, typed in Arial font, formal and hollow. The message itself was brief. "I know I don't deserve your time. But I need 10 minutes. Please." No threats. No guilt. Just the desperation in those last two words. Lena saw it later and raised her eyebrows. "You're not actually considering it, are you?" Alina didn't answer right away. Something inside her was strangely calm. She had faced boardrooms filled with billionaires. She had spoken in Paris. She had stared down the ghosts of shame and walked past them with heels clicking. Maybe this wasn't about him. Maybe it was about choosing to listen, not for closure, but for confirmation that she no longer needed any. She replied, 10 minutes. Public. No cameras. Friday. 5 p.m., Madison Park. She hit send and didn't look back. When Friday arrived, the sky was overcast, the kind that held the memory of rain without the threat of it. Madison Park was quietly alive, joggers, readers, a mother feeding pigeons beside a stroller. Alina sat on a bench under a maple tree, dressed simply in tan slacks, a white blouse, and a scarf knotted at her throat. She looked like peace wrapped in poise. Cole arrived late. He approached with hesitant steps, hands in the pockets of a blazer that no longer fit like it used to. He looked thinner. Haggard. Like regret had become his only meal. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting at the far end of the bench. Alina gave a polite nod. He searched her face for something familiar and found nothing he recognized. "I've made mistakes," he began. "I thought I was building a life, but I was burning it down." She said nothing. He continued. "You didn't deserve how I treated you. Or how I erased you." His voice cracked slightly. "And I see now that everything that's falling apart in my world, it's because I didn't value the one person who held it together." Alina listened, not to forgive, not to argue, but to hear the final gasp of a man drowning in the sea he created. She waited until his words dried up, until he looked at her with eyes that pleaded for something she no longer carried. "Cole," she said softly, not cold, not cruel, just still. "You weren't my mistake. You were my lesson. One I'll never repeat." He looked away, shame rippling through his features. "I don't expect anything," he whispered. "I just wanted to say it. Out loud. Before it's too late." Alina stood, brushing invisible dust from her blouse. "You were too late the moment you chose silence over truth." She didn't need to scream. Her calm carved deeper than any insult could. She walked away with the same grace she had entered with, measured, certain, untouched. Cole sat back, staring at the space she left behind. He thought of all the times he had mocked her strength, laughed at her silence, assumed she would come crawling. But now he understood. Alina never had to raise her voice to be heard. She never had to beg to be remembered. Her existence had become louder than his presence. And as her figure disappeared down the curved park path, the truth settled like dust in his throat. She didn't need revenge. She had already won. Cole's descent wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow, humiliating unraveling. After the meeting with Alina, he returned to his penthouse and stared blankly at the walls, the same walls she once painted with mood boards and laughter. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was suffocating. Investors who once bowed to him now ignored his calls. A former business partner leaked internal emails to a media outlet, revealing unethical practices tied to Vanessa's manipulation and Cole's own reckless spending. Headlines spread fast: Cole Harrington, Empire in Crisis. His reputation, once untouchable, had become a cautionary tale. The luxury car was sold. His personal assistant left without notice. And Vanessa? She had vanished weeks ago with another developer, leaving only a signed exit clause and a six-figure withdrawal. Cole wandered through his days like a man watching his own funeral in slow motion. One morning, he stood at the large window of his now half-empty penthouse, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. On a nearby billboard was an advertisement for the Paris Global Design Expo, featuring Alina's silhouette beneath the words, "Rebuilding the Future." Her face wasn't visible, but he knew it was her. Even the world had started recognizing her without him. Desperation has a smell, something like old coffee, regret, and clinging sweat. Cole began walking past Alina's firm once a week, never going in, just standing across the street watching people enter and exit her glass building. It stood tall, bright, alive, everything he wasn't. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, he waited outside for nearly an hour, watching the revolving doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. She never came out. What he didn't know was that Alina had shifted most of her meetings to virtual conferences and private consultations. Her security team noticed him. Damien noticed him. Even Lena noticed him. "What's he doing here?" she asked one day as she parked across the street. "Is he stalking her?" Damien's response was simple. "No. He's grieving. Not for the woman, but for the version of himself he lost when he let her go." Word traveled fast in the design and development world, and Cole's presence was no longer commanding, it was pitted. Clients turned away, former protégés stepped over him, and media outlets referred to him as the ex-husband of industry titan Alina Reyes. It stung more than the headlines. It shattered the illusion that he had mattered more than he actually did. Late one night, Cole sent her a final message. Not by email. Not by text. But a handwritten letter, left at the front desk of her office. The envelope was unmarked, sealed carefully, and addressed only as to Alina. Inside, he poured out a letter that didn't beg, didn't defend, it only acknowledged. "I see you now. Not as a woman who left, but as a woman who outgrew the cage I built. I hope the world treats you kinder than I ever did." Alina read it the next morning, her expression unreadable. She folded the letter once, placed it in the drawer of her desk, and continued with her day. She didn't reply. Not out of malice, but because there was nothing left to say. He had spoken, finally. But too late. Later that evening, Cole walked past her building one last time, soaked in rain, watching her name shine in white letters beneath the studio lights. She had become more than a success story. She was a testament. A reminder that some women don't break, they bloom. And some men don't fall, they fade into the background of the greatness they once tried to contain. And as he disappeared into the gray crowd, the only sound left was the soft hum of her name, echoing far louder than his silence ever had. Paris was colder than Alina expected, not in temperature but in memory. The city, with its romantic architecture and silver-lit boulevards, had once been the promise Cole dangled before her, the honeymoon that never happened, the dream always postponed. Now she stood in it, alone, not as someone's wife but as someone who had resurrected herself. The Global Design Expo was being held in the glass-domed Palais de Congrès, and a Reyes Interiors had been given a featured installation near the heart of the exhibit, her Healing Rooms project, a design initiative blending architecture with mental health spaces. It had attracted global attention. On the second day of the event, while presenting her concept to a group of Scandinavian investors, a deep, refined voice cut through the circle. "Your work doesn't just tell stories, it frees people from them." Alina turned, and that was the first time she met Matteo De Luca. An Italian architect and social designer known for rebuilding war-damaged villages into art communes, Matteo was a gentle contradiction, worldly yet grounded, bold yet careful. They spoke for 2 hours that day and for every day after during the expo. It was not flirtation that grew between them, it was resonance. They didn't orbit each other. They moved as if they'd collided in the same storm and come out sculpted by the same winds. Back in New York, Alina returned to her life with a sense of breath she hadn't known she was holding. She and Matteo stayed in touch, first through long emails, then regular video calls, then collaborative project ideas. They began co-developing a design concept, the Resilience Pavilion, a global mobile structure designed to host therapy, art, and architectural education in marginalized communities. Lena was the first to notice the shift in Alina's eyes, how they softened when Mateo's name came up, how her smile tilted differently now. "You like him," she teased. Alina didn't deny it. "I respect him," she said. "That's deeper." Mateo visited New York 6 weeks later, and they spent an afternoon touring Harlem's oldest brownstone homes, sketching side by side like old friends. That evening, they stood atop Alina's rooftop garden, watching the sunset stretch its amber limbs across the skyline. "You don't need anyone," Mateo said, his voice low, sincere. "But I hope one day, you'll want someone again. And I hope you'll look my way." Alina didn't respond immediately. She leaned her head on his shoulder instead. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a beginning. But it was no longer an ending. A week later, Alina drove upstate to visit her childhood home in Queens. Her father, Gustavo, had kept the house as it was, but the walls now held more laughter. With Lena's help and a generous portion of her first international commission, Alina had transformed her late mother's sewing room into something sacred. A small design and art space for young girls from immigrant families. Rosa Reyes had taught her that design wasn't about wealth, it was about dignity. Alina named the space the Room of Return. That day, she welcomed 10 teenage girls into the studio, guiding them through their first sketches, their first fabric experiments. One girl looked up at her and whispered, "I want to be like you." Alina smiled, tears misting her eyes. "No," she said gently. "You'll be better. I'm just showing you the way." And as dusk settled over her childhood street, as the laughter of future dreamers spilled into the evening, Alina finally allowed herself to believe something profound. She had not just moved on, she had moved forward. Toward something richer, deeper, and infinitely more real. The kind of new bond that didn't erase the past, but proved it had purpose. She hadn't found love again. Not yet. But she had found peace. And that, finally, was enough. Spring in New York had arrived like an answered prayer. Trees once bare now blushed with cherry blossoms, and sidewalks buzzed with hope instead of hustle. Alina stood on the steps of a newly unveiled building nestled in the heart of Brooklyn, a glass-fronted, wood-trimmed community center she had co-designed with Mateo, officially named the Reyes de Luca Pavilion for Healing and Design. It was their first completed project together, funded partly by international grants and partly from Alina's own company profits. Inside, rooms were filled with color, texture, light, spaces where art therapy met architecture, where trauma met transformation. The opening ceremony was small, intimate. Mateo stood beside her as city council members and youth program directors gave speeches of gratitude. But when it was her turn to speak, Alina kept it simple. "This building is more than walls. It is proof that broken things can be redesigned into beauty. That people, like places, can be made whole again." Her voice didn't shake. Her smile didn't falter. The applause that followed wasn't just for the building. It was for the woman who had become the blueprint for rebirth. Later that afternoon, as golden light poured into the rooftop garden of her Tribeca home, Alina hosted a quiet gathering with the few people who had held her together when she couldn't hold herself: Lena, Justin, Damien, her father, and now, Mateo. The air was filled with soft music, clinking glasses, and laughter that didn't feel borrowed. Lena, sitting beside a tray of fruit and wine, raised a toast to Alina, proof that grace is louder than revenge, and that silence can build what noise never could. They clinked glasses, and Alina laughed, a full-bodied sound she hadn't made in years. Mateo leaned closer, whispering something in Italian that made her smile widen. Across from her, Justin handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "An offer," he grinned. "I've just been offered a tech merger deal. And I want you to be my first board advisor." Alina blinked, surprised. He added, "Your fingerprints are already on the foundation of everything I'm becoming." She took the envelope with both hands. Around her, new dreams were forming, ones she hadn't scripted, hadn't chased. They had come because she created space for them to grow. That night, alone for a moment under the stars, Alina opened her journal, the same one she started the day she left Cole. She read the first entry: "I don't know what I'm walking into. I just know I won't walk back." She smiled, then added her final entry: "I found everything I lost, and things I never knew I needed. I lost a marriage but found myself. I lost a name but gained a legacy." I lost silence, but my voice came back louder. And love? If it finds me again, it'll be walking beside me, not ahead of me. She closed the journal and placed it in a velvet box, locking it gently. Below her, the city shimmered with 1,000 lights. Somewhere far away, Cole sat alone, staring at a news headline that read, Alina Reyes to launch design school for women in underserved communities. He didn't cry. But the hollow inside him widened. And as Alina stood by her window, watching the sky, a new idea formed in her mind, one that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. It was time to create something new again, not because she had to, but because she finally could. And in that moment, under the quiet stars, a new beginning truly began. The end.